A couple of months ago, I released a video called Biggest Blowouts in US Pro Sports, chronicling times teams opened up a can, or maybe even a whole keg, of whoop ass on an opponent. I decided to take a look at the times where a team started to lay a beat down on another, but the squad being beaten down was able to turn the tables and scratch out an epic come from behind win. These are the biggest comebacks in US Pro Sports. In this video, I will be only focusing on teams that completed the comeback and went on to victory. I could probably find examples of big comebacks where a team fell just short, but as far as I'm concerned, it's not really a comeback if you don't go all the way. We'll start with the NHL, if for no other reason than their largest comeback story is, from a storytelling standpoint, kind of the most anticlimactic of the group. The largest deficit overcome in an NHL game is 5 goals. And over the century long history of the league, this has happened on 10 separate occasions. 5 of the original 6 teams, Boston, Chicago, Montreal, the New York Rangers, and Toronto, have pulled this feat off, which is not really surprising considering when the 2026 season starts, all 6 of them will have been in the NHL for a century or more. It's actually a bit more surprising that the Detroit Red Wings, the other original 6 team, hasn't done this at some point. The Buffalo Sabres, Calgary Flames, Colorado Avalanche, Edmonton Oilers, and St. Louis Blues, despite being much newer teams than the original 6, have also pulled this feat off. Now, I'm not going to go through all 10 games, because this video is going to be long enough as it is. So, with 10 teams tied, who am I giving the unofficial honor of biggest comeback to? I'm going to look at 2 games here, both of which a team had a 5-0 lead in the third period and proceeded to surrender 6 consecutive goals to wind up losing. And for the Toronto Maple Leafs fans out there, I'm not doing this just to dunk on your team. It's just sheer coincidence that the Maple Leafs have blown a 5-0 lead in the third period twice. The first of these occurrences came on January 26, 1987, when the Calgary Flames ventured to Toronto to play the Leafs. At 18-16 in the second period, the Leafs netted their 5th goal to take a 5-0 lead. At 6:02 in the third, Calgary got their first goal, and they proceeded to pot 4 more over the next 13 minutes and 9 seconds of game time. The game went into overtime, where the Flames scored the game winner a minute 30 in. A starkly similar pattern occurred on November 29, 2000, when the St. Louis Blues visited the Maple Leafs. Toronto scored their 5th goal at 2:54 in the third period to again take a 5-0 lead. At 4:51, St. Louis scored their first goal of the night. 14 minutes and 41 seconds later, with 25 seconds remaining in regulation, they scored their 5th goal of the game, sending the game to overtime, where the Blues tallied the game winner in only 18 seconds. Like the NHL, Major League Baseball has well over a century of history and has multiple teams tied for the largest come from behind win. Unlike the NHL, though, this has only happened 3 times in baseball, and only once in the last 100 years if you happen to be watching this video after June 15th of 2025. On June 18th, 1911, the Detroit Tigers hosted the Chicago White Sox at Bennett Park in Detroit. The White Sox started out like the proverbial house of fire, plating 7 runs in the first inning. They scored 3 more runs in each of the 4th and 5th innings, giving them a 13-1 lead. The Tigers, who up to this point had only scored 1 run in the second inning, suddenly found their offense in the bottom of the 5th. Detroit scored 4 in the bottom of the 5th and 3 in the bottom of the 6th to close the gap to 13-8. The White Sox answered with 2 more runs in the top of the 7th, bringing the score to 15-8, but those would be the last runs the Sox would score in this game. 15 runs will almost always be enough to win a baseball game, but not on this day. The Tigers proceeded to score 5 in the 8th and 3 more in the ninth to walk it off, winning the game 16-15. The 12-run deficit set the MLB record for the largest comeback of all time, which still stands to this day, although it has been tied twice. Oddly enough, both of those games involved the same franchise, the, at the time, Cleveland Indians. On June 15th, 1925, the Philadelphia Athletics, who are now the somewhere in Northern California Athletics, I think, were hosting Cleveland. The game was scoreless going into the second inning, and Cleveland managed to start a streak of 6 consecutive innings scoring runs. By the top of the 6th, they led the A's 14-2. After Philly got one back in the bottom of the 6th, Cleveland scored once in the top of the 7th to bring the lead back to 12 runs at 15-3. The A's answered in the bottom of the 7th to make it a 15-4 game, but that's kind of a band-aid on a bullet wound at this point. At least it would have been, if not for the bottom of the 8th. The A's apparently just set up a conga line around the bases as 13 runs crossed the plate in that inning alone. They held Cleveland scoreless in the ninth to secure the 17-15 win and established themselves as the second team in history to look at a dozen-run gap as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Cleveland would get their retaliation 76 years later, albeit against a completely different franchise. On August 5th, 2001, the Tribe hosted the Seattle Mariners. Seattle put up 12 runs by the third inning, opening up a 12-0 lead. After Cleveland scored two in the fourth, the Mariners answered with two more in the fifth to grab a 14-2 lead. Those would be the last Seattle runners to cross the plate during the game. Cleveland would score three in the seventh, four in the eighth, and five in the ninth to tie the game. Unlike the other two games, this game had free bonus baseball by going into extra innings. Fans got 1.22 baseball games for the price of one. Cleveland completed the epic comeback by walking it off in the bottom of the 11th. For the Mariners, this loss would have a little more meaning than most. The 2001 season was the year the Seattle Mariners tied the MLB record with 116 wins, pulling even with the 1906 Chicago Cubs for the most victories in a season. If the Mariners don't blow this 12-run lead to Cleveland, they'd have finished the campaign with 117 wins, thus topping the 1906 Cubs and having sole possession of the record. I don't think that would have had any bearing on the Mariners losing the 2001 ALCS to the Yankees, which is the other thing this team is known for. But at least they'd had the definitive winningest season in nearly a century and a half of U.S. pro baseball. The NBA, despite having nearly as long a history as the MLB and the NHL, only has a singular largest deficit that a team has successfully overcome. On November 27, 1996, the Utah Jazz, who were off to a 10-2 start and on their way to making the NBA Finals that season, hosted the Denver Nuggets, who had won less than a third of their games at that point. The Nuggets somehow jumped out to a 36-point lead at one point in the second quarter. They took a 70-36 lead into halftime, only to watch it evaporate in the second half. They were outscored after the break by a 71-33 margin, resulting in a 107-103 Jazz victory. Interestingly, in no quarter in this game did both teams score 20 points. Denver outpaced the Jazz 37-19 in the first frame and 33-17 in the second. In the second half of the game, the pattern repeated itself but in the opposite direction, as Utah won the third and fourth quarters 36-15 and 35-18 respectively. The Jazz victory seemed to result from their terrible and well-played sections of the game being just slightly better than Denver's. And finally, we come to the NFL. When people think of NFL comebacks, they most likely think of the Buffalo Bills coming back from a 32-point deficit in the playoffs against the then Houston Oilers. The game is often referred to as the comeback, although it is occasionally referred to as the choke, depending on whether someone wants to congratulate Buffalo or shit on the Oilers. I'm guessing you'd expect a game called the comeback to be the biggest come-from-behind win in NFL history. And you would have been correct if you'd made that statement before December 27th, 2022. On that day, the Minnesota Vikings and Indianapolis Colts just had to hinder the legacy of possibly the most iconic come-from-behind win in the history of the NFL, and the Vikings managed to claw back from trailing by 33 to best the Colts. The hapless Colts, who finished the 2022 NFL season with a 4-12-1 record, actually managed to shut the Vikings out in the first half while scoring 33 themselves. After a Vikings touchdown on the third drive of the third quarter, Indy got their last points of the day on a field goal, making the game 36-7. Then the Vikings scored 29 consecutive points to force the game to overtime. After trading punts in the extra period, the Vikings were able to march down the field and seal the win with a 40-yard field goal. Ultimately, other than setting a record for the largest NFL comeback, this game didn't mean that much overall. The Vikings finished the campaign with a 13-4 record, tying them with the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers held the tiebreaker, giving them the number 2 seed. And Minnesota finished far enough ahead in the standings of NFC South champions Tampa Bay that the win over the Colts didn't affect the playoff seeding at all. By either winning or losing the game, Minnesota still would have been the 3 seed. Minnesota would host the New York Giants in the wildcard round, who beat them en route to getting trounced by the eventual NFC champion Philadelphia Eagles. And that wraps up this video on the biggest comebacks in US pro sports. If you enjoyed this video, or want to troll Maple Leafs fans about losing a 5-0 lead in the third period twice, please feel free to comment on, like, or share the video, as well as subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more weekly content. As always, thanks for watching.